There's a new twist in the live cattle export scandal tonight. Meat and Livestock Australia stands accused of violating international animal welfare rules with the equipment it provides to Indonesian abattoirs. And it's not the usual suspects making the criticism. It comes from Australia's Chief Veterinary Officer. The federal government asked the chief vet for an independent review after the recent scandal over the treatment of live cattle sent to Indonesia. The findings of that investigation will have the industry scrambling, as Indonesia correspondent Matt Brown reports, and a warning as always on this subject, some viewers may find the images distressing.
When this shipment of Australian cattle arrived in Sumatra last week, the live export trade took the first steps to recovery since it was shut down in May. But the future of this $300 million a year business still hangs in the balance.
When the Saywal Express turned up this afternoon, there was a genuine feeling of warmth and we're back in business sort of thing, because, you know, had there been no cattle, we would have been out of business in November.
Under the new export rules, the shipments are monitored by independent auditors.
I would definitely say it's a process which has the potential to catch us off guard and to create some anxiety in my own staff. And so they've been very good with helping us through.
However, the auditors aren't the only ones watching. Animal rights activists are intent on shutting down the trade altogether.
If we export live animals, we export a huge risk to those animals, and we've failed them by sending them to countries where there is no legal protection for them.
While most in the business are defensive and bitter about the recent controversy, the managing director of Elders Indonesia, Dick Slaney, is determined to prove the critics wrong.
We need to show them that we are doing our utmost to treat cattle from the point of receival all the way through the whole process as humanely as possible.
The cattle must be tracked as they enter the feedlot and all the way to abattoirs which comply with international animal welfare standards. The sceptics are not convinced. The RSPCA's chief scientist, Peter Jones, says past pledges to improve have left major problems.
Given how much time I spent looking at the way in which Australian animals were being slaughtered in Indonesia, I could be nothing but utterly disappointed that we are still sending animals into that market.
The new system is designed to stop animals being sent to facilities like this one, exposed by Four Corners in May. But much of the suffering was made possible by restraining boxes distributed by Meat and Livestock Australia, using industry and taxpayer funds.
What happens when steers fall over in the Mark 1 box is obviously they try and get up again. When they try and get up, because their legs are roped, their head and neck is lifted up, and because they can't right themselves, their head slaps heavily back onto the concrete plinth.
The history of the boxes is a tale of remarkable misjudgment. Meat and Livestock Australia began building them in 2000 to improve traditional slaughtering methods. The crucial international standards came into force in 2005. Since then, the MLA has installed more than 100 boxes in Indonesia. But now, Australia's Chief Veterinary Officer has assessed the boxes against the rules and found they're unacceptable.
Anyone could see that they were cruel and that they just facilitate the terrible method of local roping slaughter. And Australians should be outraged, Australians who care about animal welfare, that their tax dollars have been invested in animal cruelty in Indonesia.
Lynn White from the activist group Animals Australia obtained much of the footage reviewed by the Chief Veterinary Officer. Last month, she obtained more pictures of the Mark 1 box being used on Indonesian cattle.
There was an MLA commissioned report from last year which even mentioned that the force of the animal's head coming up and hitting the concrete slab that they were falling on was actually breaking their jaws. From that moment onwards, or from previous reports, they should have seen that continuing to install these devices was absolutely unacceptable.
The MLA has been working on improvements to the Mark 1 box for several years. The Mark IV is the latest model. There are just a few in Indonesia. While the Chief Veterinary Officer says this device is acceptable, he cautions that it too can cause suffering if it's not used properly. Part of the problem is that the animals are still conscious when they're killed. On that front, the crisis in the trade has triggered a major change. Large numbers of Australian animals will now be stunned before they're killed, and Mark 1 boxes are being modified to make it possible. Stunning is widely recognised as the most humane way to slaughter an animal, and it's the norm in Australia.
It's easier, it's more efficient, the meat's beef's of better quality, it's safer. You know, there's benefits written all over stunning, so.
At the Elders Abattoir south of Jakarta, they've insisted on stunning for years. The company's now training slaughtermen from other facilities to use portable stunning machines.
I personally have taken on a bit of a task about probably 14 to 16 months ago to introduce stunning. And that was proving quite difficult to make that cultural change. That's not a cultural change, that's a leap. This crisis for us has enabled that leap to turn into more of a change.
Even Indonesia's Council of Muslim Scholars is putting more effort into telling slaughtermen that stunning is acceptable under Islamic law.
When we saw the animal handling is very bad, we feel sad and we feel very sorry about that. And that's why now we are starting to do something. I think we think that we have to do something to fix this situation in Indonesia.
You know, I would predict that there could be, by July next year, we could be looking at 60 to 70% of Australian cattle being stunned in Indonesia. You know, which would be a phenomenal outcome at the end of the day. And I would hope that the people that, you know, the doubters and whatnot, the people in Australia that want to shut us down, would look at that and say, well, that's a hell of an outcome, and, you know, well done, guys, because it's going to be a hell of an effort.
The trouble is, the Gillard government did not make stunning compulsory when it issued the new rules. The reformers and the sceptics alike will have to remain vigilant to overturn widespread indifference to animal suffering.
Well, it's likely the auditing system will be fairly stringent in the first few months whilst everybody is looking at it. We're very worried about what's going to happen 6 to 12 months down the track when the focus is no longer on Indonesia.
Matt Brown reporting from Indonesia.